on it with my colleagues. My colleagues listed here at WSDA, at UC Riverside, at OSU, and then within WSU as well. All right, so Rostem girdler is in the Buprestidae family. It's one of the metallic wood boring beetles, and they're characterized by the larvae are cambium feeders, and they have a girdling effect from that feeding on whatever the plant host is. So this is the same family as emerald ash borer, which is, if I'm not mistaken, the most damaging pest in recorded U.S. history. So they can be a serious pest. The host of Rostem girdler, as you might guess, is rose family brambles, Rosa and Rubus genus. It's a pest of caneberries, of course, and ornamental roses. It's a native to Europe, and therefore it's been a long-standing caneberry pest of Europe. They've lived with this pest for a long time. First reports in eastern U.S. or eastern North America were around 1878, but it was reported as well established by 1913. And most information we have on this pest, most of the detailed information, most of the stuff that the extension information has been based off of, especially in the West, largely comes from two seminal studies from Utah in the 1950s and 60s, where they had a pretty big, significant outbreak. I'm just going to give you a second to read this quote from one of their papers about how serious it was at that time. And so it was confirmed in Idaho by the 1970s after getting to Utah. And then it was confirmed in the Pacific Northwest in Eastern Oregon in 1994. And as of 2014, it was confirmed in Washington State. Northward from where I am down in Vancouver up to King counties, and then Spokane and I believe Lincoln County as well in Washington. But reports had just been increasing in the greater Willamette Valley to the south of me. And if I'm not mistaken, it's still a current Oregon Raspberry and Blackberry Commission priority for control. At this point, it's largely just naturalized in Southwest Washington and in Northwest Oregon. So the surveys that we started in 2018 suggest that the Rostem girdler life cycle and the ecology does seem to differ in the Pacific Northwest compared to Utah. We were seeing later emergence than the Utah information and a longer activity period than in Utah. Utah had about 2 to 3 weeks of activity, and we were seeing between 6 and up to 8 in some cases, 8 weeks. One of the reasons why it's taken a good foothold in the Northwest is just because we have really abundant wild hosts. Of course, tons of Himalayan blackberry, also evergreen blackberry, wild rose, a lot of species of wild rose, thimbleberry, white bark raspberry, trailing raspberry, and then we've got a lot of Rosa ornamentals in urban areas. Think of Portland being named the Rose City. And then also just the Pacific Northwest caneberry and nursery industries. So just a ton of hosts around for this pest. The reason why I'm presenting again, one of the major reasons I'm presenting again at the Small Fruits Conference is because this grant allowed us to scout a bunch of sites throughout Northwest Washington, 63 in total. And so the first Rostem girdler damage north of King County since 2014 was confirmed in May 2022, in Whatcom County, just north of Bellingham, just on the outskirts of Bellingham, in some feral Himalayan raspberry or Himalayan blackberry. And then my colleague, Charlie Koslor, went around and scouted another 50 some odd sites. Found 2 more sites in Snohomish County in September 22, 8 sites in Skagit County in September of 22 again, and then 1 more in Whatcom County, just a little bit north of where I'd originally found it, in Whatcom. And if you look on this map here, all the red icons with the bug is where we had a positive identification of it. And all the green ones were just the sites that we scouted, but we didn't have any signs of row stem girdler damage. I wanted to mention too that it's also seeming to show up north of us in British Columbia. We've had about 5 unofficial sightings on Vancouver Island. These are just amateur entomology enthusiasts that post to iNaturalist.com. And then a couple on the mainland, one near the way into the Fraser River Valley, and then one way northward in Pemberton. There's some significant challenges for Pacific Northwest cane growers in trying to control this pest and to know when to. One of the major things is it's really difficult to determine how imminent the risk is. We still don't have a really good metric on how far they can move from a wild host into a planting in a given season. So how far they might be able to jump in a given season. So if you know it's nearby, how fast will it get to you, right? The best we've been able to do is we've been able to measure that it does at least move 400 feet in one season from wild hosts. But again, it's been really difficult to measure, and it may move farther in a given season. It's also really pretty difficult to determine row stem girdler presence, especially in that first year before you have damage that's going to alarm you in some way. It's hard to just scout for it in real time. It's really easily missed. There isn't a ton of them, and they're easy to miss even when you're used to looking for them. Also, just the impact might be limited, it might be variable, or it might be well hidden. Like in this picture, there is a girdled cane in here, but it's really not easy to see. So you might be scouting for, wild brambles around the edges of fields, and it's difficult to see them. The other thing is it just superficially tends to resemble Phytophthora because it causes wilting. It also looks like water stress. It can look like nutrient deficiency in addition to water stress. And it can just generally look like biennial cane senescence too. The other thing is that if you have floricane fruiting plantings, damage is probably likely to occur after your summer harvest and probably won't show up until the next season or during cane tying. And what this of course causes is that growers, our experience has been that growers can be blindsided by this with significant damage, especially to new plantings, but also to yield loss. We've had growers that reported up to 70% yield loss in certain fields, but it's highly variable. The other aspect is that there's a very narrow, fairly difficult, effective insecticide application window. So what has to happen is sprays have to come after emergence, but before egg laying. There's only one generation a year, but it's a pretty short window. Emergence timing historically just has also been really difficult to determine. Of course, this is a biological entity and it doesn't adhere to a calendar. There is a general time of year that it shows up, but it doesn't adhere to it, right? So you might have ineffective sprays that you've put out, just trying to be cautious. And this has been a major thing that we've tried to tackle. The other aspect is that it may occur during bloom, so that makes spraying even all the more difficult because then you have to look for sprays that can be sprayed during that time, and you have to accommodate the timing to avoid risk of hurting pollinators. The other aspect is that spray season is extended when row stem girdler activity doesn't match up with spotted winged Drosophila control season, and it can push the legal spray limits in a given year. Eradication is pretty unlikely and probably unrealistic overall. That's due to the fact that we just have so many wild hosts for this out there. You're not able to control them. Some key row stem girdler damage symptoms are spherical and or spiral shaped galls on the cane. This is the easiest way to determine row stem girdler presence. Again, one of the easiest ways to find out if you might have it near is look at the wild hosts that might be on the edge of your fields or nearby. Often the galls are within the bottom foot on first year canes, but it might be on multiple locations, especially on second year canes. And this is just showing a bunch of different manifestations of what this can look like. This is black diamond blackberry. I believe this is another blackberry, Marionberry, Himalayan blackberry, wild rose, thimbleberry, another black diamond blackberry, and raspberry cane, showing the different ways that the cane swells. The other thing to look for to confirm that it actually is damage from row stem girdler, because there are some things that cause galling, even just mechanical damage can cause galling that can get mistaken for it. So one of the best ways to do that is to actually cut the cane near ground level and start scraping away the bark away just above the gall, starting at the gall and upward to reveal the spiral feeding pattern that this beetle has in the cane. The other thing you can do, which you can see here in this picture, is split the cane in half, and you can find the spiraling in a different manner that way. You'll often see too that the diameter will increase as you go up, and eventually, if it's made it that far, it will end up in the cane pith, which is where it overwinters. In midsummer to fall, you'll see wilted top growth, nutrient stress foliage, perhaps mushy fruit, especially if you have any ever-bearing varieties with a fall harvest. You'll get girdling above the gall, not always. Sometimes the cane does survive. In fact, often it does. But a key aspect that might differentiate it from something else like water stress or phytophthora root rot is that you'll get sprouting below the girdled point on the cane. These are just some pictures of what it looks like. This one down here was rather severe from this past year, but you can see all these canes that were effectively girdled by row stem girdler. Most of these canes actually had damage on them, and it didn't die, but you can see some of the chlorosis in there as well. Oh, the other aspect I want to mention is that there's really easy cane breakage at harvest and or during cane tying. A lot of growers that we've worked with find out that they have an infestation in their floricane fruiting plantings when they are tying canes up for the next season, and all those canes, or a number of those canes, have had row stem girdler damage, and the cane snaps during the process of trying to tie the cane up for the next year, especially in blackberry. So I'm going to try and give you an overview of the generalized row stem girdler life cycle. This schematic down here comes from 1938, but it matches up fairly well on average to what we see in the Northwest. On the bottom, you have these dates going from May to June to July. Then you have raspberries developing throughout that period. And on the top, you have what they've termed borers on the top here, different aspects. So starting with adults, adults can be found on the leaves, usually beginning in June, but it can be as early as May and much later, even into July. And you'll find them chewing on the leaves, eating the leaves, preparing to mate, and the female to deposit eggs on the cane. They lay a single egg. We don't know how many a single female might be able to lay, but they lay one egg per cane usually, but sometimes a couple up the cane as well. It's usually this whitish or cream colored egg that they lay on the cane. The larvae hatch usually within 4 to 14, maybe a little bit longer days, and chew directly into the cane and begin eating in a spiral fashion in the cambium, which is of course what causes the girdling effect. These are just a couple pictures of it during different stages of girdling the cane. You can see how this cane is snapped off, and this is the, I believe it's the third instar larvae. It's still not quite into the cane pith yet at that point, not ready to overwinter. And at this point, maybe a little bit later in the season, maybe early August, you might begin to see wilting occur and cane breakage. Over here in this picture is showing the larvae now in its fourth instar overwintering stage within the pith. So this is actually a cane that I sampled in spring. Beginning in probably about mid-May-ish, you might begin to find pupae in canes, starting the pupation process. And then beginning in late May, probably into June, you're going to start to find adults in the canes, and they can stay in the canes for several weeks. They might not come out for several weeks. This is just a picture of one actually coming out in real time, and they leave this D-shaped emergence hole. So this is something else you can look for, which you usually find above a gall, maybe, up to a foot and a half above the cane, above the galling point. We used to think that there was a humidity threshold for emergence because that's what came out of the Utah-based information, but we did an experiment and it appears that it actually doesn't seem to make that much of a difference. So we did this emergence experiment over the past couple of years where we collected a whole bunch of canes from all these sites in Oregon and Washington down near where I am, and we put them into these retrofitted refrigerators that we turned into incubators and put in different temperatures and different humidity levels in each of these incubators. And then what we did was try and match that up with emergence data that we collected from all these sites outdoors in real time. One of the things that came out of this that stood out is a standout metric was heating hours. So this is something that's sort of similar to growing degree days. So all we really have in this is, so this is the indoor data. So this is from the incubators, and we only really have 4 data points, but we've calculated them at a whole bunch of different thresholds. So over here, we've got 50 hours at 50 degrees or above. In the middle here, we've got at 55 or above. And at the end, we've got at 59 degrees or above. So all the, and then on the side here, you have what's the cumulative amount of hours that have amassed when emergence occurred. What we did was match that up with the outdoor data, and we expected it to look like this. We wanted to see, where does this data seem to converge? Where do these data seem to be collecting, where something predicted it both indoors and outdoors in these very, very different conditions? And what we were able to determine from this is 900 hours at 55 or above 55 degrees, at or above 55 degrees of 900 hours of 900 heating hours. And these two bars sort of represent, like, if there was a spray right here at 900 hours, would you have gotten the row stem girdlers that were there? And it tended to work out very well at this threshold of 900 hours. The exciting thing about it is that we were able to put this onto AgWeatherNet as a new emergence model. And we're excited about it because back when we started this, there was certain guidelines in the PNW Pest Management Handbook from 2017. And this emergence model, if you had followed those rules from 2017, this emergence model would have theoretically saved about 10 sprays if you were spraying on a 7-day cycle in most years, and up to 13 sprays in 2022 because it was a really cool spring and it delayed emergence by about 3 weeks beyond the average. There are no specific insecticides that are labeled for row stem girdler, although there's a bunch that are effective on it. And Utah State University Extension came up with these insecticides that are effective on row stem girdler. Down here, there's a couple that are OMRI certified if you're a certified organic operation. And again, I want to emphasize that we're talking about full cover sprays beginning immediately after adult emergence. So sprays before that are not effective. The adult has to be out, it has to be feeding on something. Or at least there would have to be residual activity that happened after the adults emerged. Again, applications might happen during bloom, so adhere to label restrictions, of course. Repeat based on the reapplication interval, might be 7 to 14 days. And the activity period is another kind of wild card. We know that about 3 weeks is the major push, but again, it can last for up to 8 weeks, 6 to 8 weeks. As far as cultural management goes, regarding stand susceptibility and resistance and trying to sort of prioritize what you protect, new plantings are probably the most vulnerable. They can be significantly compromised because the root system's not well established yet, and if you kill back the cane, it doesn't get as much photosynthate as it needs to build that root system. Everbearing varieties also can be pretty severely compromised. Can get a lot of yield loss, especially for the fall harvest, because that's typically, by the time of the fall harvest comes around, the damage has shown up. But also in established floricane fruiting varieties, you might get potential yield loss the first year of infestation, but that's the lower risk. The higher risk is potential loss of floricanes for the following season, which would become apparent during cane tying and pruning operations. Mechanically, you should prune canes a few inches below the lowest gall near the ground level. And it's really important that you destroy the damaged canes because you want to burn, chip, or bury under 2 inches, because once the larva is into the cane pith in the 4th instar, it's capable of surviving in a dead, pruned out cane. So leaving it in the row middle is not a good option. Robust pruning alone can provide significant infield control. The Utah study showed up to 80%, but really this is only if nearby wild hosts are also removed, and that's not always something that you can do. There's another aspect that might be coming into this. Beginning in May 2018, we began to see all these ungirdled blackberries where we just couldn't find a viable row stem girdler in the cane, and the cane had damage, but it wasn't girdled. And what we started finding were these parasitoid larvae inside it. You can see this is a row stem girdler over here, and this is the parasitoid pupating over here. They're about 2 millimeters. This is a phenomena that was reported back in 1940 in Ontario, Canada, and they at that time reported 90% parasitization in a raspberry planting. So it's somewhat hopeful if it's the same one. We were able to finally identify this. It was a way more complex than I expected, as Baryscapus reglesi, and it's in the same subfamily of known parasitoids of emerald ash borer in North America and row stem girdler in Europe. So there are parasitoids that are known in Europe, but there's really only one that we know of in the US or in North America. We caught or reared out 60 plus, maybe more of these wasps between 2018 and 2022. All of the wasps were the same species, which is a good thing because we know what it is. It was first discovered in Minnesota in 1919. It has never been found in Western North America before, so that is exciting. But it was noted one other time as a parasitoid of row stem girdler in New York State in 1938. It has never been employed as a biocontrol, though, and there's no other existing information on levels of parasitism, but it appears to have a significant effect on row stem girdler populations. So something that we fairly commonly see is like you would go back to a site that had a lot of damage in it in 1 year, and say the next year, it would be really difficult to find that damage. So we knew something had to be going on, and this is a plausible cause. We're still collecting data to determine the percent parasitism level and the biocontrol potential of this wasp. So we're going to keep working on that as best we can. I think with that, I'll take any questions. I'm pretty good on time here.
Do we have any questions for Justin?
I want to give a big thanks to Tom Pierbolt, who just passed away recently. He was a big foundational aspect or person in getting us going on this down here. So thank you to Tom. Will be best.
Even though he's not here in person, you can still ask him. We have that technology. Okay, well, thank you, Justin.